Tractate Avodah Zarah discusses the laws and prohibitions of idolatry and the worship of false deities. Chapter 1 begins the discussion of these laws. The first Mishnah says, if somebody worships an idol during the 3 days preceding the idol worshipper's holiday, it's forbidden to do business with them, lend them items or money, borrow items or money, repay a debt, or accept payment for a debt. The logic is that by doing so, this close to the holiday, it'll cause the man to praise and worship his idol, which is problematic. Others say that it would be permissible to accept payment, as this would distress the man. Others disagree, saying although he's distressed now, he no longer has a debt, so he'll be happy later. Additionally, it is worth noting that the idolatry discussed in this tractate refers to the worship of actual pagan idols in ancient Roman Babylonia, things like Mercury or Dagon or otherwise. So many of these laws have little practical application nowadays. The Gemara says there's debate as to the usage of wording in the Mishnah based on reference to particular verses. Related, it said that when Mashiach comes, God will take a Torah scroll and declare, whoever occupied themselves with it shall have its reward. The other nations of the world will then enter in disarray, and God will put them in order so he could speak to them one at a time. The Roman Empire will speak first, as they are prestigious, and they will tell God they established marketplaces and bathhouses. They acquired lots of gold and silver, and they'll try to argue they did it for the Jewish people so they could learn Torah, but God will say it was all for themselves and their hedonism, and they'll leave. Then the Persian Empire will enter after the Romans, as they're the second to most prestigious, and they'll say they constructed bridges, conquered cities, and waged wars, and they'll argue that they did so the Jewish people could learn Torah, so God will say no, it was for themselves, and they'll leave. The Persian Empire had a bit of a better claim, as they helped build the temple, unlike the Romans. The other nations of the world will also try, as they have a better claim since they didn't subjugate the Jewish people. The Roman and Persian empires alone are specified, as they'll endure until Mashiach comes. It said the nations of the world will argue, as it wasn't fair. They were never offered the Torah in the first place properly, unlike by the Jewish people, where it was said that God held Mount Sinai over them as a threat to force them to accept the Torah. So God will counter-argue, saying that he offered them to follow the 7 Noahide laws, and many didn't follow that as it was. Some actually say the Noahide laws simply no longer apply, so there's no longer a reward. Rather, it's explained as it says that any non-Jewish person who learns Torah is considered to be like a Kohen Gadol, and they receive reward like one who does something without being commanded to do so. Anyways, by Mashiach, the nations will argue that the Jewish people who also didn't fully observe all the mitzvahs, but God will testify that they did, along with the heaven and earth. As it said, those will cease to exist without the acceptance of Torah. And additionally, people of the nations of the world will testify that the Jewish people kept the Torah, as Nimrod will testify that Abraham didn't do idolatry, and Lavan will testify that Yaakov didn't do theft, and Potiphar's wife will testify that Yosef didn't commit adultery, and Nebuchadnezzar will testify that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah didn't bow to an idol, and Daryavush will testify that Daniel didn't cease prayer, and many others. So the nations will argue they want a second chance to keep the Torah, so God will say, fine, keep the mitzvah of a sukkah, an easy mitzvah with no monetary cost. So everybody will do so by the holiday of Sukkot, but God will make the sun shine with blazing heat, so everybody amongst the nations will leave the sukkah and also kick it as they exit. It's explained that the heat is fair, as the normal Sukkot holiday can sometimes extend into the summer season, and also technically you're exempt from the sukkah if it's too uncomfortable, but the principal issue is that they kicked it as they left. It's also said that this is the one day ever that God will laugh. Others say the nations of the world will become partial converts and keep tefillin and tzitzis and whatnot, but will reject them once they see the difficulties of the war of Gog and Magog. It's said that this laughter is the one time he laughed about a creature. It's also said that during the first 3 hours of the day, God studies Torah. During the next 3, he judges the world and sees it deserves destruction, so he sits on the throne of mercy. During the next 3 hours, he provides sustenance for the world, for every creature, and for the final 3 hours he plays and laughs with the Leviathan, although there's a lot of commentary as to exactly what this is all in reference to. Others say since the destruction of the temple there is no laughter, so it's debated what God does in the fourth 3-hour period. Some say it's when he teaches children Torah, some say it's when he listens to the songs of the angels. There are many interpretations. There are many further analogies on the great importance of learning Torah. There are further points on all this. And it's said from a number of sources that God punishes his people in small increments, so they'll be worthy of the world to come. It's also said that God is only angry a single instant every day for 153,884th part of an hour, which was only known by Bilam. It discusses this exact time, which was already said at a few earlier times in other tractates, and it says one of the sages tried to use this time to curse a heretic, but he kept sleeping through it, so he realized that doing so is improper. Based on this, it said that a person should not pray the additional Musaf prayer during the first 3 hours of the day on Rosh Hashanah, as he might be judged poorly. This does not apply to the prayer of a congregation, as they have a lot of merit. There are other points on this. It said that all of the mitzvahs done will testify on their performance during the world to come. Others say the good deeds when Mashiach's coming will come and strike those that worshipped idols. And it's also said that the sin of the golden calf was only done so as to encourage people in the future to repent. There are further such points. It said that any mitzvah done will precede the person in the world to come, and any sin done will lead him to the day of judgment. And there are further points on the golden calf. Some say that without the golden calf, death would have been abolished. Others disagree. It said that there are 4 men who are considered to be dead: a poor man, a blind man, a person with sura'as, leprosy, and a person without children. It expounds on related verses. There are additional teachings. It said that the evil inclination can be conquered through learning Torah and doing kindness and similar. Anyways, back to the prohibition against doing transactions with somebody who worships idols before their holiday. We said it was 3 days. It's not 30 days like are required for animals before offering them to the temple, as idolatrous offerings don't have strict laws of blemishes and whatnot like there are by the temple. Non-Jewish people bringing animal offerings to the temple in Jerusalem still have the requirements that it not be missing any limbs and bring sources. These are additionally discussed. Anyways, the 3 days prior to the holiday, it debates if this is 3 full days prior or 3 days including the holiday. It debates this, giving a number of instances of actual ancient idolatrous Roman holidays called Calenda, Saturnalia, and Creatism, along with their dates. It said that it means 3 full days prior, not including the holiday. It also explains the reason behind the prohibition against making sales during this period. Some say it's so they don't receive profit and thereby praise their idol. Others say it's so as to not facilitate the actual service to the idol. There's a practical difference if the man already has an animal ready for its offering, as the second one would not be relevant then. It debates this from a number of sources and it cites some related incidents. Additionally, it said lending and borrowing is forbidden during these days. Lending is an issue for the above reasons, and borrowing is an issue. Some say that borrowing will lead to lending. Others say that this could still lead to the person praying to his idol. The same applies with borrowing money and collecting a debt. It cited all of these instances to show all of these individually are necessary. There are further points on this. It's actually a debate as to whether a person can collect debts prior to their holiday, although some say there's a difference and it would be allowed if it was a verbal loan. It cites a few additional rulings on other subjects, such as that it's held on Shabbos. You cannot hire workers, but it would be permitted to ask somebody for assistance. You have to do this vaguely without directly explicitly asking them. It gives other instances of held laws, like by laws of impurity and similar. New Mishnah, some say it's prohibited to do business dealings 3 days prior to their holiday, and also 3 days after. Others say it's allowed in the days after. The Gemara says, some say it's always forbidden on Sunday. What holiday this is referring to is questioned by the commentaries, and the consensus reached is that this, based on the unique wording, refers to the worship of a Babylonian sun god, an ancient pagan holiday that took place on Sundays, so this no longer applies. The difference between the opinion on the first Mishnah, which banned dealings 3 days prior, and this here refers to 3 days including the holiday. Others answer that the prior permitted business transactions, unlike here. Others say this is disagreeing with the opinion that in the diaspora the prohibition is only on the actual holiday. Others say the latter opinion is holding that there's a ban 1 day prior, like a different opinion. He'd also hold that selling old male horses during wartime is allowed. Others disagree. There's debate on various other subjects, including several points on laws of prayer. It's held that a person makes a personal prayer besides for all the pre-written words in the prayer of Shomea Tefillah during the Amidah, among others. New Mishnah. The following are the idol-worshipping holidays referenced so far, that business transactions are banned around. It's a few pagan holidays: Calenda, Saturnalia, and Creatism, the Genusia, day of the emperor's birthday, and also the day of his passing. Others say this last one only counts if the emperor's possessions are burnt, as that's when idolatrous services were done. There are a few minor pagan holidays: the day of the shaving of their beards and their haircutting, the day of their returning from sea or release from prison, or making a wedding feast. There it's forbidden to do business dealings on that specific day with that specific man. The Gemara explains these ancient holidays, citing the dates in their source. They revolved around the winter solstice, and it says that tradition was passed from Adam seeing the first winter solstice. Some say it was tradition from him seeing the sunset for the first time, and he thought the world was being destroyed due to his sin. So he fasted and wept with Eve all night until the sun rose, and then he offered an ox with a single horn on its forehead. Anyways, regarding the holiday of Calenda, it was a Roman holiday, so it said that the prohibitions only applied to Roman citizens. There are further points upon the prohibition of partaking in such an idol worshipper's wedding, even if the food is kosher and whatnot. It said that it would be permissible 12 months after the wedding. Creatism was a holiday that celebrated the day Rome seized their sovereignty, which occurred twice, once with Octavian against Cleopatra, and the other earlier from the Greeks. It said that the Romans allied with the Jewish people to defeat the Greeks, and kept their treaty for 26 years, but then betrayed them. It cites sources for this and discusses their harsh decrees, including the passing of Rebbe Yehuda ben Bava, who secretly passed rabbinical ordination to 5 students, and was then caught by the Romans and stayed to give the others time to escape, and was impaled by 300 spears. The Great Sanhedrin also exiled themselves around this time, as there were too many murderers, so instead of having them all be held liable, they just went into exile. It discusses these dates further, including the concept that the world will be for 6,000 years, 2,000 of nothingness, 2,000 of Torah, and 2,000 of Mashiach, and it discusses opinions on how this is calculated. It also gives some guides on the calculation of the sabbatical year cycles. There, for the point on the calculation of dates for documents, the Genusia holiday for the emperor was said to be the day of inauguration of the emperor. It debates how this inauguration would work regarding the ascension, and it said that the emperor could appoint his son upon request, as Marcus Aurelius spoke to the sage Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi, his friend, saying he wanted his son to rule after him, and also to grant Tiberius its freedom, but he could only do one of those. So Rebbe, as he typically did, would communicate with him in analogy or code, showed him the analogy of a man on the shoulders of another man. The top man handed a dove to the lower man, who let it go free. Marcus Aurelius took this to mean that he should appoint his son, and then have his son declare Tiberius as free. Another exchange they had, Marcus Aurelius confided to Rebbe Yehuda that some Roman dignitaries were persecuting him, so Rebbe plucked single radishes from a garden one at a time, and Marcus Aurelius took this to mean he should have them killed one at a time over a period. The reason their exchanges were so encoded and secretive was as the people of Rome wouldn't have been too thrilled with their relationship, so they kept it all very secretive. There's another incident where they had a whole conversation on advice for Aurelius's daughter, who had gotten into an adultery scandal, and they communicated by sending vegetables to each other. Marcus Aurelius would frequently send Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi sacks of crushed gold covered with wheat, but Rebbe refused it, saying he already had plenty of money, but Aurelius said it should be for all of his descendants. They would also meet in secret. Marcus Aurelius had a secret tunnel to Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi's house, and he'd bring 2 servants, both of which he'd have killed to maintain their secrecy. Aurelius wanted their meetings to be totally private. Once another sage, Reb Chanina Bar Chama, was there, and Aurelius got upset, so Rebbe said, "Don't worry, he's an angel." So Reb Chanina was sent out, and he saw the dead servant, and he didn't know what to do, if he should report it or not, so he just prayed and had the guy be resurrected. And Aurelius said that was neat, but still the meeting should be private. The 2 men were very close, and Aurelius would bring Rebbe food and offer to help the sage into his bed as a stool, but Rebbe refused, saying he didn't want to disrespect the throne. Marcus Aurelius also asked if he would enter the world to come, and Rebbe said yes, as the verse says that no remnant of the house of Asaph will enter, but that refers only to those that act like Asaph. There was another of such men within the Roman government, a non-Jewish man named Ketia Bar Shalom, who used his position to keep the Jewish people safe from the Caesar of that time, and for it was executed. But right before he was executed, he circumcised himself and said all of his possessions should go to the sage Rabbi Akiva, and a voice from heaven said that Ketia would enter the world to come. It gives instances of such other righteous non-Jewish men. Onkelos, the nephew of Titus, who converted to Judaism, so the Caesar sent some troops to arrest him, and Onkelos convinced them to convert to Judaism also, so more troops were sent, and he convinced them, and more were sent and were told to not speak to him, and as he was being arrested, he placed his hand on the mezuzah, so the soldiers asked what he was doing, so he explained how God guards the Jewish people when they were impressed and also converted. It also brings the verse regarding Rivka, as she was pregnant with Yaakov and Esav. It says, 2 nations are in your womb, and some read the word for nations as the similar word for proud ones, reference to their respective descendants, the 2 righteous men, Marcus Aurelius and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Anyways, it also discusses whether the burning of the king's possessions upon his death is an idolatrous ceremony. It also explains the idolatrous hair-cutting festival as sharing the bread and also cutting the hair. Another ancient Roman holiday, every 70 years they would have a healthy man representing Esav, right atop a lame one representing Yaakov, and the upper man would dress like Adam, and he would wear the flayed face of the sage Rabbi Yishmael, and they would declare that their empire had defeated Yaakov. This was not mentioned earlier as it wasn't a yearly holiday. Those were the Roman holidays. There were also some pagan Persian holidays called Muharrenkai, Aknesei, Bachnunei, and the 10th of Adar. It lists the locations of several ancient pagan temples. New Mishnah. If a city has an idolatrous service within, you can do business outside. If it has an idolatrous service outside, you can do business within. If there's a pagan holiday going on inside a city, the road within cannot be used if it's only to the city. It can be used if it goes through the city. The Gemara gives instances of such cities. It says there was no concern here, similar to a particular case of a pot of a Jewish person and a non-Jewish person cooking on the same stove. Some say this means there's no concern of the non-Jewish men dumping non-kosher meat into the Jewish person's pot, so too there's no concern about receiving idolatrous money. Others say it means there's no concern of doing business on the holiday. Others say it means the same way there's no concern of non-kosher fluids from the pot splashing into the other, so too there's no concern of commerce in the days before the holiday. The issue with using the road towards the city is that it'll look like you're attending the idolatrous holiday. There are many many similar rulings, like to not bend down to pick up coins in front of an idol and similar. There are further points not to drink water from rivers or ponds with your mouth or hand, as you might swallow a leech. If somebody does so on a Shabbos, there are medicinal matters that are permitted to be performed. It also says a person should not drink water at night due to the demon Shabriri, and it explains how to avoid this. New Mishnah. If there's a city with an idolatrous holiday where some shops are decorated and some are not, the decorated shops are prohibited and the undecorated ones are permitted. The Gemara says this applies to decorations of rose or myrtle that are for the idol, as you'd be benefiting from the smell. It's debated if fruit decorations are permitted. It debates whether purchases made can benefit an idol, as a source says buying items at a pagan fair is allowed, but that's explained to be allowed if there's no idol tax, like a purchase from a householder. It's also said that an animal bought from a pagan fair should have its hamstrings cut. This cannot be done by a consecrated animal, which can't be injured, so it's just left and made to starve. It said animals, slaves, and maidservants can be purchased from an idolatrous fair. It debates if this refers to Jewish or non-Jewish slave. It says both are allowed. There are related points. New Mishnah. Some things forbidden to sell to a person who worships idols, things used for a variety of idolatrous ceremonies, some particular fruits with their stems attached, frankincense, and a white rooster. Some say a white rooster can be sold amongst other roosters, and if it's sold alone, its toe can be clipped, so that way it won't be used as an offering. The above listed can be sold if they're unspecified. Some also add to the list fine date palm, chatzav, and niklas, which will be defined. The Gemara defines these fruits and items. In regards to selling the white rooster, it's debated if it can be sold if the man requests specifically the white rooster, or if it cannot even be sold unspecified by itself. It debates this in regards to somebody asking for specifically a mutilated white rooster, or if somebody asks for a white rooster but is accepting other colors too. So he's possibly trying to trick people to get the white rooster for idolatry. It's unresolved. It debates definition on the remaining fruits. New Mishnah. If the custom of a location is to sell small livestock to idol worshippers, it's permitted, otherwise not. It's never allowed to sell an idol worshipper large livestock of any sort, as will be explained. There's a concern the animals will be worked on Shabbos. Others say it's allowed if it's a maimed animal, and others allow a horse. The Gemara explains a conflicting source regarding the smaller animals, as apparently back in those days there was a serious concern that people would do bestiality, so selling animals, if such was a concern, was forbidden. Although it's dependent on the region, so some people would be willing to, but wouldn't because they didn't want to sterilize the animal. It explains the issue with large animals, being that it could be that the animal would be worked on Shabbos, but perhaps not, as they're not actually borrowing it, they're owning it. So others explain the issue is the purchase might take place close to Shabbos, and they'll test the animal to see if it behaves, and the seller will call it and accidentally cause it to walk on Shabbos while carrying. It further discusses these issues. It also qualifies permissibility of selling land during the sabbatical year and further on animal sales. It's also said that it's forbidden to sell weapons to an idol worshipper or to a Jewish robber who's a sneak thief and therefore might kill with them. It's debated if selling shields is permissible. The issue would be that shields too can be used as a weapon, but it's ruled that selling them shields is permissible. Some say it's an issue to sell particular iron used for making weapons to them. Others say it's allowed to sell to the Persians who defended the Jewish people. The remaining opinions are clarified, and it's held that the sale of horses is allowed to an idol worshipper. Regarding a fattened ox which would not be able to work on Shabbos, is debated whether it's allowed to be sold depending on the opinion, as it could become thin and it's ready for slaughter. This is debated. New Mishnah. Selling idol worshippers bears or lions or anything that could injure people is prohibited, along with building a tiered court building, which were used for specifically capital punishment, building a stadium arena or a platform that was used for execution. Building them altars and bathhouses is allowed, but not the part of the structure that would have the idol placed within. The Gemara says this would imply, like the opinion that selling large, non-domesticated animals that are not dangerous would be allowed. This is debated and it's refuted. It argues this further from various sources, and it also explains the various forbidden structures. It cites an incident when Rabbi Eliezer was being tried in an idolatrous court and was acquitted, and the judge swore by the name of an idol, which upset the sage greatly. It cites many related teachings and says that there was this one man who it said had cohabited with every single harlot in the world, and one told him that he'd never be forgiven for this, so he went away and begged forgiveness from God and cried until he passed away, and it was declared from heaven that he would go to the world to come. Another story, two sages were traveling and they reached a fork in the road, one to an idolatrous temple and one to a brothel, and they decided to travel by the brothel so as to have the opportunity to subdue their evil inclination. It also cites the Romans' persecution of a few sages, one of which was sentenced, but the messenger was intercepted by Eliyahu the prophet and was flung 400 parseas away. A different sage was similarly tried by the Romans, and he was burnt to death as he used to say God's name according to its letters to teach himself in public. His wife was also executed as she didn't stop him from doing this. His daughter was sentenced to live amongst the harlots as she was walking in Rome, and she overheard somebody talking about how beautiful her steps were, so she started walking very particularly. It said when they were sentenced, the three of them all quoted verses acknowledging God's judgment. It further expounds on this whole incident. One sage, Rabbi Meir, his wife was related to the daughter who was sentenced to live among the harlots. So Rabbi Meir went to go rescue her and gave the guard a coin along with the prayer, Elokad de Meir Anini, God of Meir, answer me, which he showed protected him, and he rescued his sister-in-law. The guard was arrested and sentenced to be hung, so he said the prayer and he was unable to be hung. So they asked who this Rabbi Meir was, and he told them this Rabbi Meir hid in a brothel, and Eliyahu appeared like a woman embracing him, so the Roman soldiers thought this wasn't him, and Rabbi Meir escaped to Babylonia. Anyways, it said that going to a stadium or to see conjurers or snake charmers is frivolity and leads to a neglect of Torah. It said going to a gladiator match would be allowed, as by shouting you can participate and lead to a gladiator being spared, and also if there was a Jewish slave in the arena, you'd be able to testify to his death. Some say there were issues with going to circuses or theaters, as there were idolatrous practices or possibly a suspicion of such. It quotes many related verses on the negativity of scoffing and jests and also arrogance, and commending those who don't waste time with theaters and circuses. It expounds on many verses relating the importance of Torah study. There are many further of such teachings. Regarding building the place for an idol, that's not allowed, but the payment for the service is not prohibited. Some hold this applies even to payment for the prohibited building of an idol, even if he completed the idol, as the act of striking the final blow, which is what gives it the status of an idol, isn't given worth greater than the minimum value of a prota. This opinion holds that an employee's payment is accrued across his entire service, not all at once at the end. New Mishnah. Some say we don't make ornaments for idols like chokers or rings or nose rings. Some say it's allowed to pay. Some say we don't sell plants to idol worshippers if they're attached to the ground. Detached produce is allowed. Others say attached produce is allowed if it'll be detached. The Gemara discusses these points and related prohibitions. It discusses prohibitions on staring at women, and it discusses the angel of death, who it says stands above the sick with an unsheathed sword held above him. When the sick man sees the angel, he opens his mouth and a drop of poison falls off the sword into his mouth, causing him to die and his body to rot. It cites further issues on staring at women, like their clothing. The remaining points are qualified. New Mishnah. Renting houses to idol worshippers is forbidden in Israel, and also fields. Only houses can be rented in Syria. Both are allowed outside of Israel. Others say renting houses alone is allowed within Israel. In Syria, selling houses and renting fields is allowed, and outside both can be sold. Even when renting is allowed, it's not allowed for living quarters, as the issue here is that they'll bring idols into the house, which is not allowed. Renting a bathhouse is never allowed, as it'll be under the name of the Jewish owner, which could cause issues with the usage on Shabbos. The Gemara explains there's no issue with removing the mezuzah on the house, which means renting the field has the two prohibitions of giving away land within Israel and giving up the Ma'aser tithe. The debate by Surya and otherwise is a debate on the status based on the conquering by King David. It holds like the latter opinion that renting houses within Israel is allowed, selling houses and renting fields in Surya is allowed, and selling both is allowed outside of Israel. This applies with the creation of neighborhoods of idol worshippers, which is 3 or more people. There's no concern about them selling their property further. The remaining points are qualified. It discusses issues with non-Jewish people working for Jewish people on a field on Shabbos, and it's unresolved what the status is if there's an unspecified deal for the Jewish man to work on the weekday and the non-Jewish man to work on Shabbos as sharecroppers. And that's the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Tractate Avodah Zarah discusses further laws of idols and idolatry. The first Mishnah says, apparently back in those days there was a bit of concern of people doing bestiality, so because of this there was a rule against stabling animals in the inns of non-Jewish people out of concern that somebody within might do such a thing, which is obviously not allowed. Naturally, this isn't a general concern of non-Jewish people. These issues specifically refer to the pagan cultures and idolatrous religions of ancient Rome and Babylonia, so this has basically no practical application nowadays whatsoever. Additionally, women shouldn't be secluded with them either, although this prohibition would also apply to seclusion with Jewish men, due to the general concern about inappropriate behavior. Although in that specific time, at least, when it was a concern, there was a general prohibition of seclusion for everybody, in case you were killed. The Gemara debates on the topic of the concern whether bestiality was actually an issue. It cites a source which says that offerings for the temple can be brought by non-Jewish people without any of such concern. It debates why there's no concern there, possibly as the men wouldn't risk damaging his animal's reproductive organs through the act, and bestiality by a woman would not be done, as then the animal would walk around suspiciously close to her, and people would suspect her. The concern of female animals being with female people is that men might drop by to visit and end up committing bestiality, as it said that apparently the pagan people of that region were so depraved that they preferred to be with animals over people. This was caused by the serpent and Eve, although there's no concern of this by Jewish people, as this impurity was removed by Mount Sinai. The concern exists by birds also, such as geese and whatnot, as there were a few testimonies written here about sage sages who actually witness people in the market purchase birds, go a while away, and commit acts of bestiality. Others answer very simply, if there's seclusion, there is a concern of such a thing happening to animals beforehand, but after the fact, we don't assume that anything actually happened, and the same exists by women in seclusion. Others debate this. Alternatively, the difference in opinions as to whether or not there is a concern of bestiality in general or by offerings is simply based on the dispute if such a concern exists at all. The debate this further. Based on the fact that such a concern exists by the para aduma, the red heifer offering, it suggests that this means the offering is one that is consecrated to the altar. Others disagree and say it's just a concern of it getting a blemish. However, there is the famous story of Dama ben Nesina, a non-Jewish man from Ashkelon who was renowned by the sages for his righteousness, as the sages wanted to purchase a new stone for the ephod in the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, and offered him 800,000 golden dinarim for it, and he accepted. However, the key to the chest was underneath his father's pillow, and he refused to wake his father during his nap, as he had so much respect and honor for him, and therefore lost out on the deal. As a reward, God made a para aduma, a unique red heifer, born into his flock, so the sages went to purchase that, and the non-Jewish man, Dama ben Nesina, said he knew he could charge any price for the cow and they'd pay it, but he'd only asked for the sum he lost out on from the initial sale. So based on this, we see there is no issue when purchasing a red heifer from a non-Jewish man. Others, however, say that it was specifically purchased through Jewish merchants, and there's no concern as it was guarded from conception, and even further, the mother too was guarded to make sure nothing happened to it. There's no concern in earlier than that. The way they knew the cow would give birth to a red heifer was that they passed a cup of red liquid before the mother as she was reproducing to make her kids have a red hide. Red heifers are still uncommon as they can't have 2 black hairs on their entire body. This was done with specifically selected herds. It further debates if there's such a concern by offerings. It questions whether it's allowed from several verses, and says there's an opinion that the animal will only be damaged if this is done during their first 3 years, so those are the years where there's no such concern and it could be offered. It debates this from further verses. It also discusses several verses on the times the sun stood still for Yeshua and Moshe and otherwise. Regarding the specification against seclusion of a woman with a non-Jewish man, this is a bit odd, as there's a prohibition against women secluding with a Jewish man too. So it explains this is specified as the prohibition here applies even if the man's wife is around. There's no concern of murder here, either as the case is of prominent women or as women typically carried defensive weapons. There's a practical difference by a woman who is only prominent amongst men. Regarding the concern for murder, it said if you're walking on the road with such a dangerous person, back when there was a constant concern of being murdered, you should stand on the man's left side, so if you'll be attacked, you'll be in advantageous possession. Some say there's variation on where to stand if he has a sword or staff. Additionally, you should maintain the high ground, and this man should not bend down in front of him in case he gets his skull crushed. Also, if he's asked where he's going, he should stay a distance further than where he's actually traveling to, as Yaakov did to Esav, and it gives instances of sages who did this when traveling alongside bandits to keep safe. New Mishnah, further on concerns with the non-Jewish people of those times, again referring to the ancient pagan Babylonian tribes, a Jewish woman should not help deliver the baby of a woman who serves idols, as then she'll be assisting in the eventual service of idolatry. No such concern exists by them delivering the child of a Jewish woman. They should not nurse each other's children for the above reason, and not within the idolatrous woman's domain, as there's a concern she might harm the child. The Gemara says there might possibly be an issue with an idolatrous woman being a midwife for a Jewish woman, even if there are people watching, as she might press on the soft part of the baby's skull to harm it, and this was a concern as once such a woman testified that she had done such a thing many times, although others say she was just lying to try and anger people. The issue with the Jewish woman birthing and nursing is, as mentioned, these were people who served idols, so the child would grow up to do that too, so there's problems with assisting it. Some say there's an issue with others nursing a Jewish child, as they might poison him. Some say delivering their children for pay is allowed to not upset people, and there's debate if it's allowed on Shabbos. It said if somebody worships idols, you should neither help or harm them by bringing up or lowering in them or their animals out of pits. This is unlike a person who obsessively worshipped pagan idols back in those days, where it was said to be acceptable to lower them into pits and not help them out. It said that circumcising a person who served idols was allowed if he wanted to convert, but somehow there was a concern with them circumcising a Jewish person in case this other person decided to harm him. Some say this specifically does not apply to a Kuthian, some say this specifically does apply to a Kuthian. It's debated. Others say it's allowed if he's a recognized doctor. It further debates if such a thing is allowed. It also argues whether a woman could circumcise based on the verses regarding Zipporah's circumcising her son. Some say she had somebody else, or Moshe do it. New Mishnah. Further on concerns of danger in those times, medical treatment was allowed to get from those ancient pagan idol worshippers. Monetary treatment was allowed, but not treatment of the nefesh, which will be defined. Some say haircuts are never allowed out of concern of being killed. Others say it's allowed in public. The Gemara debates what monetary treatment and treatment of the nefesh is. It said monetary treatment refers to treatment for animals, and treatment of the Nefesh is for a person. It says it would be allowed to get medical advice. Medical treatment from these pagan medical practitioners was allowed if the man would die without it, and this does not apply to a person who obsessively worships idols as he tries to attract followers. A life-threatening illness here is defined as an illness that Shabbos can be violated to treat. Others say that any illness that requires assessment to see if the patient will survive can have Shabbos violated on it. Others say something like a burning fever is considered to be like an internal affliction, so Shabbos can be violated to cure it. It further defines what constitutes an internal affliction along with various other diseases. It lists several other maladies and a number of ancient medicinal cures for them. It lists further foods and plants with various medicinal properties. Regarding the concerns of having a haircut by pagan idolaters, it said if it's done in private, you should have a mirror, so that way you'll look like a distinguished person and won't be harmed. If you're giving the haircut to such an individual, there is a prohibition against cutting by a particular lock of hair, which was kept as a part of one idolatrous people's custom, leaving 3 finger breadths around it. New Mishnah. The following items from pagan idolaters are prohibited out of concern they were used for idolatrous practices. Their wine, their vinegar, that was initially wine, out of concern it was poured as a libation on an idol, hadrianic earthenware, the skin of an animal with a hole opposite its heart. Some say there's only an issue if the incision is round, which was a pagan practice back then. Meat that is entered into a place of idol worship can be used, but not meat that's leaving. If there's a pilgrimage to an idol, business transactions with people on the way there is forbidden, on the way back is allowed. Leather flasks and earthenware jugs of such people which are storing wine of a Jewish person, the wine is prohibited, and it's debated if the prohibition extends to benefiting from it. Regarding their grape seeds and grape peels, they're prohibited along with benefit, although others say this only applies if they're moist. The murias, which was a fish mixture of a sort, and cheese from the city Beis Unyaki are prohibited, and it's debated if this extends to prohibited benefit. The general issue of eating cheese made by a non-Jewish person, it gives a few reasons, including the concern that it was curdled using the rennet of a non-kosher, improperly slaughtered animal, and it discusses a few verses on this. The Gemara gives the scriptural source that wine used for an idolatrous libation is forbidden, among other things. The specification that vinegar, which turned to wine, is mentioned, is to say that if regular kosher vinegar is being held onto by such a person, it only requires a single seal, as they won't do libations with vinegar. Also, cooked wine used for idolatrous libations that was initially fresh wine is prohibited, to show that cooked wine too only needs a single seal, as it's not used for libations. There's further discussion on various types of wine. Diluted wine is subject to prohibition if uncovered, or if possibly used for idolatry. Cooked wine is ruled to not have such concerns by either. There are further points in the rules that sharp wine, bitter wine, and sweet wine are not subject to prohibition if uncovered. It debates what kinds of wines these refer to. It gives a few exceptions to drinks prohibited if left uncovered. The general issue with uncovered drinks is in case a snake comes by and poisons the wine or other liquid. It gives definition to types of snake poisons and the various dangers. Such drinks also shouldn't be given to animals, besides for cats, which aren't damaged by such things. There's further discussion on wine, and it's ruled that if wine is stored in the courtyard of an idol worshipper, it's allowed if the owner of the wine had a key or sealed the wine. It debates how much of a seal is required. Some say one seal, some say a double seal, which it defines. There are further concerns by wine. These prohibitions of wine also apply by beer. Some say as it could lead to intermarriage. Some say it's a concern of being left uncovered. It gives further definitions to this. It also defines hadrianic earthenware, which were used to soak wine, and this is totally forbidden. This is discussed along with the pierced skins. The skin is only prohibited if it's a circle, in accordance with that opinion. Regarding the animal slaughtered and being brought to an animal, this opinion holds that an animal slaughtered by an idol worshipper has no assumption it was done for idolatry. The remaining points are discussed, including that business with a man on a pilgrimage to an idol is problematic, as he might then give thanks to the idol. It's allowed to do towards a Jewish person on the way to an idol, as he might change his mind along the way. However, if an idol worshipper is traveling to or from a fair, business is allowed, but not to a Jewish man on the way back from such a fair, as he probably did it to sell an idol. Trade with a person returning from a pilgrimage to an idol is only allowed if he's going individually. If he's part of a group, he might plan on returning. It also qualifies the prohibition regarding flasks and containers. These are discussed along with points on purging such vessels to remove the absorbed non-kosher wine flavor. It lists many different types of pots, vessels, and utensils and their absorptive qualities. It also defines moist grapes and peels. They have a 12-month limit, and if they're prohibited, it includes for benefit, and if they're allowed, that includes for eating. Wine sediment of Arameans is allowed after 12 months, as are jugs from idol worshippers that contain libation wine. Also, leather canteens of travelers are allowed after 12 months, as are grape pumice of Arameans and libation wine within red and black jugs. It also qualifies the prohibitions on the fish mixture, which had non-kosher wine possibly mixed in, and the cheese from the city of Beis Unyaki, as majority of the calves of that region were used for idolatry. Others debate these concerns. Related, if somebody betrothed the woman using the waist of a cow that was stoned for killing somebody, that's legally valid, but not if it came from a cow sacrificed to an idol. The difference is based on a verse. If the rennet to make cheese was from an idolatrous offering, it's forbidden to eat and benefit, as the rennet is considered considered to create the actual cheese, so it's considered to be an identifiable part. The verses are discussed, and it says possibly the issue with cheese made by a non-Jewish person is that it was left uncovered, so a snake could have bitten it. It's debated, and it also said that cheese will definitely have traces of milk within, which has some serious kosher issues. Others say the concern is that the cheese could be curdled within the actual stomach of the improperly slaughtered animal, which would be very problematic. There are other explanations. Some say there's concern it was coated with lard. Others say it could be curdled with vinegar or possibly sap of a young tree under 3 years, which we don't eat from. It debates these latter reasons. New Mishnah: the following are prohibited to eat if made by a non-Jewish person, but is allowed to benefit from. Milk made without a Jewish person watching, as they don't follow the laws of kosher, so they might mix in non-kosher milk. The same applies with their bread and oil, as will be explained. Others allow the oil. Their cooked food is prohibited to eat, and preserves for wine and vinegar is included, along with minced taris, a small fish, brine without a kilbis fish within, chilak, another type of fish, grain of chiltis, which is a plant, and particular types of salt, which were all prohibited, but not from benefit. The Gemara asks what the issue is with the milk, as different animal milks were different colors, and only kosher animal milk can curdle to make cheese, so it's explained the concern is that the milk is used to make a dairy dip, which could have non-kosher milk mixed in. It cannot be tested to see if it'll curdle, as kosher milk has whey, which would not curdle itself anyways. Others answer it could be problematic even if it's used for cheese, as there could be non-kosher milk mixed with the whey in the holes of the cheese. The issue with bread is actually debated. Some say it's only prohibited if there are Jewish bakers around that you could go to instead, and if there are none, it would be permitted. Some qualify further that it's allowed if the bread was purchased in the city, as the primary concern is one of the bread purchases leading to intermarriage. It debates if these points apply to oil also. It further qualifies the prohibitions on bread and wine, and possibly oil, depending on the opinion, primarily as they could lead, as mentioned, to intermarriage. There was a biblical prohibition on this, and then a later, more broad rabbinic institution. It debates several opinions as to exactly what these were. It said biblically it was instituted that a man cannot be secluded with a married woman or a prohibited relative. The court of King David instituted a ban on seclusion even with an unmarried woman, and it was later rabbinically instituted to apply to seclusion with non-Jewish people too, for the same reasons. It further debates whether there's such issue with purchasing oil and related discussion on laws of divorce. It discusses related laws of purity and impurity by particular objects. It gives the scriptural source against cooked foods made by a non-Jewish person. This would not apply to wheat kernels made into parched grain, as it's not being transformed. Crushed grain into flour is fine, as it's not being changed through fire. This stringency does not apply if the food can also be eaten raw. Others say this only applies to foods that could be put on a table for royalty to accompany bread. There's a practical difference by small fish, mushrooms, and porridge, which aren't eaten raw and were not eaten at a king's table. Small salted fish are not included in this prohibition, as they could be used for an eruvei tavshilin, which was discussed in way earlier tractates. This prohibition would apply to a certain fish and flour dish, as flour is the main ingredient there. If a non-Jewish person set a field on fire, all cooked grasshoppers within are prohibited. Generally, we're not sure which ones are kosher and which ones aren't, but here it doesn't really matter anyways, as it was done by a non-Jewish person, and that was brought as it was just the case. There are further qualifications. If the Jewish person put the meat on the coals and the non-Jewish person turned it, it's allowed to be eaten. This applies even if it would have cooked in 2 hours, and now as he turned it, it'll cook in 1 hour faster. Others say any food cooked by a Jewish person to the point of ma'achal ben durasai, which was a very short amount of cooking, can be cooked further by any non-Jewish person without any prohibitions. The inverse applies if the non-Jewish person put the food on the coals and the Jewish person turned it. It's still permitted. It's only problematic if the beginning and completion of the cooking was done by a non-Jewish person. Similar principles apply by bread, and it discusses many particular foods. The remaining prohibited foods are discussed along with the explanation of the particular issues. The chiltis grain is problematic as it could be cut with a non-kosher knife, and chiltis is a very sharp spice, so it'll absorb from the knife, and it cites related incidents. It discusses the remaining particular foods. New Mishnah: the following are related foods that a Jewish person can eat without any concerns of kosher or similar. Milk that a Jewish person wants being milk, honey and grape clusters, even if they're wet. These have no concerns with laws of impurity. Also preserves which don't have wine or vinegar put in. Unminced small fish, so you can confirm the pieces are kosher. Brine with the kilbis fish inside. Chiltis leaf, cakes of soft olives. Some add the ones with pits ready to fall out are not allowed. Grasshoppers from shopkeepers' baskets are prohibited, but from the storage areas are permitted, and this also applies with laws of purity. The Gemara clarifies regarding watching milking of animals to confirm the milk is kosher. This applies even when there's non-kosher animals in the herd, and the Jewish person is sitting and can't see them, but if he stands, he'll be able to see. There's no concern with the cow milk or taking milk from the non-kosher animal, as he's being watched. It clarifies the issues from the remaining cases. The other principles are discussed further. It defines these cases. For instance, the potential issue with the oil cakes is that wine was added, but that's said to not be a concern, and the grapes that have their pits slip out are ones that only get soft if wine is added. It explains the particularities regarding grasshoppers, and when it says this applies to teruma tithes, it means that if a Kohen is suspect to sell his teruma tithes as unconsecrated produce, the same applies, meaning what's in front of him is prohibited, but if it's from his storehouse, it's allowed, as he won't lie about that in case he's caught and his whole storehouse is confiscated. And that's the end of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Tractate Avodah Zarah continues discussing various prohibitions and forms of idolatry. The first Mishnah says, according to Rabbi Meir, all images or likenesses of humans are prohibited to benefit from, as they were worshipped in accordance with the position of the sun in those times once a year. The sages say they're only prohibited if the figure is holding a staff, bird, or sphere, while Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says it applies to any image that is holding something in its hand. The Gemara says the debate between Rabbi Meir and the sages as to whether there's this general concern of idol worship of images is if there's a concern of a minority practice in different regions. Others qualify this ruling, saying it only applies specifically to statues of kings and specifically if they stand at the entrance to a city. Additionally, this only applies to images within cities which are agreed to be prohibited. The image that's holding a staff was a form of an idol that represented rulership over the world. Holding a bird represented grasping the world, and holding a sphere represents it holding itself under the world. Others also added holding a sword, crown, and signet ring to this list, which weren't originally included as they could reference other things. It's unresolved what the status is if the statue is holding excrement. New Mishnah. If somebody finds fragments of an image, it's permitted for benefit. If it was the figure of a hand or foot, those are prohibited as those are themselves worshipped. The Gemara says if somebody finds fragments of a known idol, those can still be benefited from. The hands and feet are not considered fragments here, as they're still standing on their pedestal in this case. If an idol broke on its own, it's debated if this can be benefited from. Some say no, as the idol worshipper didn't nullify it. Others say yes, as once it broke, the idol worshipper will deem it useless and therefore nullify it. It debates this from a number of sources, and these principles are discussed further. There's some additional discussion. New Mishnah. If somebody finds a utensil that has the figure of the sun or moon or a dragon on it, it should be thrown out into the Dead Sea. Others say this only applies to dignified utensils, not common ones. The Gemara says it's specifically these three images of a sun, moon, or dragon that are depicted and worshipped by idol worshippers. Others are just for ornamentation. In fact, generally all celestial bodies are permissible, besides for the sun and moon, and all faces are permissible besides for persons, and all figures are permissible besides for dragons. This applies to permissibility of benefit. It also clarifies further prohibited images and describes this dragon image that was worshipped, which is a reptilian creature with fins beneath its vertebrae, meaning such an image is specifically forbidden if it resembles this. It cites an incident wherein a sage saw a ring engraved with a dragon and he wanted to nullify it, so he had specifically an adult buy it and also made him do so by force. This teaches that an idol worshipper can nullify any idol, his or another person's. Only a person who knows about idols and their accessories can nullify an idol, and the person can be forced to nullify an idol. The ring status isn't nullified just by being lost, as the owner still hasn't given up on it being worshipped, as it'll either be found by an idol worshipper or be sold to one. Rabban Gamliel, as mentioned in Tractate Rosh Hashanah, had various depictions of the moon on his wall, so people could testify to set the calendar. It asks how this was permissible, and there are a number of answers. Possibly the Torah only prohibits replications of things that could be replicated in their entirety. This is debated. Others suggest that it was made by others, and there is no suspicion as they were a depressed image. And also Rabban Gamliel was the Nasi, the prince, so lots of people were around to know that he wasn't doing any idolatry. Others say the images were made of several parts, others say it's allowed if it's for educational purposes. It debates the difference between dignified and common utensils. Some say they're dignified if the image on the utensil is above the water level, others say it refers specifically to images on bracelets, rings, or similar. New Mishnah. Another method of disposing of an idol, it can be ground and scattered to the wind or cast into the sea. Others say no, as it could be used still as fertilizer. The Gemara brings sources for the legitimacy of these methods of disposal. It also brings definition for the specific terminology used by Scripture in an instance when it references idolatry, and it expounds on related verses. New Mishnah. A man named Proclus, son of Philosophus, asked Rabban Gamliel why he bathed in the bathhouse of Aphrodite, and he responded to him after he left the bathhouse that the bathhouse existed and the Aphrodite statue was placed later on as an ornament. Additionally, the statue stood by a gutter that was filled with waste, so it wasn't treated like an idol, so it wasn't problematic. The Gemara explains this conversation was allowed to take place as they left the bathhouse, as mentioned, and you can't discuss Torah in a bathhouse. It explains the statue of Aphrodite was different than the idols of Peor, which is actually worshipped with waste. It debates if this creates an encompassing method of idol worship to apply by this too, by worshipping any idol using waste. There are other variations in this as to whether Rabban Gamliel gave a valid explanation or not. Some say he didn't, as the degradation didn't constitute a proper nullification. Others say it did, as it was in a constant state of degradation and was therefore nullified. There are other explanations. New Mishnah. If a person worshipped a mountain or a hill as an idol, they can still be benefited from. Their adornments, though, cannot be used. It cites verses. An Asherah tree, which was worshipped as an idol in those days, would be entirely prohibited as it's affected by people. It elaborates on the verses. The Gemara suggests there's a debate on the status of a plated covering of a mountain as to if it's like the mountain itself. Others say they agree it's not like a mountain, and they debate about a tree which was planted normally and was later worshipped as an idol. This is prohibited. They debate this further, and it further describes the verses. Further, if mountains and hills are worshipped as an idol, they can still be benefited from, but there's liability of capital punishment for worshipping them. If the idol worshipper worshipped grains and plants, they're prohibited for benefit, and there's also capital punishment for worshipping them. This is discussed further. If stones were dislodged from a mountain that was worshipped, it's debated if they're permitted or not. This is discussed further, and it brings some sources. If a person bows down to a mountain, the stones can be used by others, but it asks if they can be used for something holy, like to build an altar. This is debated based on comparison to some related cases. If a person bows down to standing wheat, it debates whether it can be used as a meal offering, based on whether changing a worshipped object can make it permissible. It's discussed. There are a number of unresolved queries, whether a lulav can be made from a palm tree that was worshipped after being planted, or possibly from a nullified Asherah tree, which is disputed. It debates whether wool for techelas on tzitzis can be taken from an animal that was bowed down to. It's also asked whether a person bows to a spring that runs through his land, as to whether it can then be used for the water libations in the temple. New Mishnah. If somebody's house is connected to a house of idol worship and the adjoining wall collapses, he's not allowed to rebuild it, and he should instead build the wall 4 cubits into his own property. If he owns half the width of the wall, it's rebuilt accordingly. The wall stones, timber, and earth transmit impurity like a sheretz creature. Others say it transmits impurity like a nida, depending on the source. The Gemara says additionally, when he rebuilds his wall into a smaller area, the remaining area cannot be used to increase the size of the house of idol worship, so the area must be used as a night latrine for children who don't really care about modesty, or he fences it with brambles and thorn bushes. New Mishnah. There are 3 types of houses of idol worship. A house that was built for idol worship, which is completely prohibited. A house that was decorated and added to for idol worship, which can be used if the decorations are removed, and a house that had an idol just put inside, which can be used if the idol is then removed. The Gemara says an opinion that if somebody bows down to an actual house, it's no longer allowed to be benefited from. This is the same status by nullification as the house built for idolatry. New Mishnah. There are 3 types of idolatrous stones. A stone specifically hewn as a pedestal for an idol, which is prohibited. A stone plastered and decorated for an idol, which is permitted once the decorations are removed, and a stone that an idol was just placed on top of, which is permitted once the idol is removed. The Gemara clarifies the second point applied even if the decorations are carved into the actual stone, so if it's removed, it's nevertheless still permitted. New Mishnah. There are 3 types of idolatrous trees called Asherah trees. A tree specifically planted as an idol, which is prohibited. A tree pruned and trimmed as an idol, which is permitted once it grows and is retrimmed. And a tree that an idol was just placed beneath, which is permitted once the idol is removed. The Gemara says some add the second point applies even if the tree is layered or grafted to another tree. If whatever grew from that is removed, then it's permitted. Some say if a person bows to a tree, anything that grows afterwards is prohibited to benefit from. It debates this seeming contradiction. New Mishnah. There are 2 possible definitions of an Asherah tree. Any tree that has an idol beneath it, or possibly a tree that itself is worshipped as an idol. It cites a related case. The Gemara explains, it says there are technically 3 possible variations as listed in the prior Mishnah. This is just a debate on variation. Others say an Asherah tree is even a tree that pagan priests just sit beneath. Others say it's a tree that the fruits are designated for idolatrous use. It holds like the latter opinion. New Mishnah. If there is such an Asherah tree, you can't sit in its shadow, although if somebody does, they don't become impure. You cannot pass directly beneath it, but if somebody does, they become impure. This does not apply if the tree extends over a public thoroughfare. The Gemara says if somebody sits beneath the shadow of the tree's height, he's pure, but it's prohibited to even sit in the shadow of the tree's shadow. There's other variation on this. The issue of impurity beneath the tree is that there are idolatrous offerings buried beneath. It cites the opinion that says this conveys impurity, and it qualifies points on the Asherah tree extending over a public thoroughfare. New Mishnah. It's permissible to plant vegetables beneath an Asherah tree in the winter, but not in the summer, where the tree benefits the produce. Lettuce can never be planted beneath an Asherah tree. Others say vegetables can never be planted beneath an Asherah tree, as the fallen leaves will act as fertilizer. The Gemara says the person who says this latter opinion seemingly contradicts himself on an earlier source regarding the disposal of idols as to whether its use as fertilizer is a concern, so it just reverses the opinions. Or it's explained that this case is different, as the opinion which says the leaves are fine is as the good it does is outweighed by the harm from the shade. It further debates these opinions along with sources. It holds like the opinion that permits the product of forbidden and permitted causes, meaning the vegetables in the soil have a permitted and prohibited aspect and are therefore permitted. New Mishnah, if somebody took branches from an Asherah tree, they're forbidden for benefit. If they were used to fire an oven, if the oven was new, it must be shattered. If it was old, it must be cooled down. If the oven was prohibited and bread was baked within, it's prohibited. If this prohibited bread got mixed up with other bread, all are forbidden for benefit. Some say he can throw out the monetary value of the wood into the Dead Sea, allowing him to use the bread. Others say he cannot do this. Another example, if wood from an Asherah tree was used for weaver's pick, it's forbidden for benefit. If it was used to make a garment, it's prohibited. If this prohibited garment got mixed up with other garments, all are forbidden for benefit. Some say he can throw out the monetary value of the wood into the Dead Sea, allowing him to use the garment. Others say he cannot do this. The Gemara explains, it gives examples of bread and garments, as there's a difference by bread. The forbidden wood was burnt up, unlike by the garments, so it said both to show both opinions still apply. It rules like this opinion that throwing out a monetary sum to use the object is permitted. It debates if this would apply by the laws of Nesech wine, which was wine used as an idolatrous libation. New Mishnah, the nullification of an Asherah tree is either by pruning, trimming, or removing a stick, twig, or leaf from it. If you remove chips of wood for the sake of the tree, it's not nullified. If it was not for the tree, it's permitted. The Gemara says if you remove chips for the sake of the tree, meaning the tree is not nullified, it's debated if these chips are permitted or not to use. Similarly, if an idol broke on its own, some say it's necessary to nullify each individual piece. Others say it only needs nullification if it broke by itself. It questions what this debate is. Some say it's on the status of the fragments of the fragments. Others say it's an idol made of sections, and they're debating if it's nullified even though it could then be put back together. And that's the end of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Tractate Avodah Zarah continues discussing prohibitions on particular forms of idolatry. The first Mishnah says, regarding the particular Marculus idol, which was probably Mercury, Rabbi Yishmael says, if 3 stones are found stacked next to each other by it, they're forbidden, but 2 are permitted. The sages say any stones next to the idol are forbidden, otherwise they're fine. The Gemara explains this dispute. If it's clear the stones fell from the idol, it's agreed they're forbidden. The dispute is whether they're not sure where the stones are from, as to if they're a bit far away from the idol within a 4-cubit area. The debate on this is on the method of worship of this idol regarding the stone placement done by its worshippers. Rabbi Yishmael's allowance of the 2 stones is only if there's a mound between the Marculus idol and the stones. There were particular streets paved with Marculus stones after being removed from an idol. Some just didn't use those streets, as they held an idolatrous offering cannot be nullified. Others did, as they said that this only applies if the offering is similar to ones done in the temple. It debates this from various other incidents. Another point, if an idol is worshipped with a rod, if somebody breaks the rod before the idol, that would actually result in a liability, as it's similar to bringing an offering. But if he threw the rod before it, he'd be exempt. This is debated. Others say if he threw it without breaking, it's not similar to an offering, and therefore there's no liability for using the rod. This is unlike the Marculus idol, where throwing the stone acted as an actual offering for itself and also to its predecessors. It debates this from other sources as to whether there's actually a difference in making an offering to an idol in a manner dissimilar to that of the temple. It's said, according to an opinion, that a person is not liable for bringing a blemished offering, but that's referring to where it has a missing limb and it's forbidden for anybody to bring. It debates this and also brings scriptural sources of liability for offering an animal to a Marculus idol. This is discussed. New Mishnah. If somebody found an adornment on top of a Marculus idol, coins, a garment, or a utensil, they're permitted as they weren't used as decorations. If it was vines with grapes, wreaths of grain, wine, oils, fine flowers, or anything similar, it's forbidden to use them. The Gemara brings the scriptural source for this principle. The coins here are not ornamental, as it's where they're not visible. The garment isn't ornamental, as where it's folded and placed unflatteringly on the idol's head, and the utensil isn't an ornament, as it's an upside-down washing trough on the idol's head. Some say the difference between offerings and adornments on the idol is if the items are behind curtains around the idol, it's prohibited as an offering. If it's outside the curtains, it could either be an ornamental offering, which is prohibited, or otherwise. Some hold that the Peor and Marculus idols had no curtains around them. New Mishnah. If an idol had a bath or a garden, it's permitted to benefit from the bath or garden as long as you're not paying the priests. If the garden or bath belong to the idol and somebody else, it's permitted to benefit from them with or without monetary compensation. The idol of a non-Jewish idol worshipper is prohibited immediately. The idol of a Jewish idol worshipper is prohibited once it's worshipped. The Gemara says, regarding the idol's bath or garden, payment cannot be given to the idolatrous priests, but it would be permitted to pay to regular worshippers of the idol. There's variation on this. It gives the people who source the last statement. It debates sources for these points at length. If somebody soldered or repaired a vessel for idolatry, it argues what the status is, and it's unresolved. It also asks if nullification can remove impurity from foods offered to an idol. This is also left unresolved. Regarding the vessels of the temple of Chania or Onias, who made a false temple in Alexandria, it questions if these vessels could permissibly be used within the temple in Jerusalem. New Mishnah. A non-Jewish idol worshipper can nullify his own idol or somebody else's, but a Jewish man cannot nullify a non-Jewish person's idol. If somebody nullifies an idol, it includes its accessories. If the accessories were nullified, they're permitted, but not the idol itself. The Gemara says, originally, this opinion held that an idol partially owned by a Jewish man and a non-Jewish man can be nullified by the non-Jewish man, as he originally held the Jewish man is only serving the idol the same way the other man does. Then he changed his mind that the Jewish man serves the idol according to his own mindset, so if the non-Jewish man nullifies his portion of the idol, it remains owned partially by the Jewish man. Additionally, in such a case of a jointly owned idol, the Jewish man's idol does not nullify the other portion too. New Mishnah. The method of an idol worshipper nullifying an idol would be to cut off the point of its ear, nose, or finger, or even to dent it. If he spat or urinated before it, or dragged it through the mud, or threw excrement at it, it's not nullified. If he sold it or gave it as collateral for a loan, it's a debate if this is considered nullification. The Gemara says the nullification through denting it is if he dented its face. It gives sources. The dispute of giving the idol as collateral does not apply if it's being given to a Jewish smelter, as that's agreed to be considered nullification. It disputes if this applies to giving it to a non-Jewish smelter, and that's further debated. If an idol worshipper gave his idol as collateral, or a ruin collapsed on it, or thieves stole it, or the owner left it overseas, if the owner intends to come back and retrieve it, it's not nullified. It explains the necessity for specifying all of these, and that's discussed. New Mishnah. If an idol was abandoned, if this was during peacetime, it's permitted. If it was during war, it's prohibited. A pedestal to honor a king is permitted, as the idol is only put up there when the king walks by. The Gemara says the Tower of Babel was considered to be an idol abandoned in a time of peace, even though everybody was scattered, as nobody returned to it, so it was nullified. The pedestals for kings are considered nullified, as kings sometimes stop using the root, and the pedestal would no longer be considered an accessory. There's further discussion on this, and it gives sources. If somebody bows down to an animal he owns, it's prohibited. If it belongs to somebody else, it'd be fine. Other sources seemingly question this. There are other rulings. If somebody bows to the earth as an idol, it's not prohibited by others for use, but if somebody digs a pit or a ditch or otherwise to worship, that would be prohibited. Also, if an animal is exchanged for an idol, that's prohibited. It's debated if this applies to exchanges of exchanges. New Mishnah. The sages were asked in Rome by philosophers, if God dislikes idolatry, why does he allow it to exist? They responded, people worship the sun, moon, and stars, but those are necessary for the world in spite of the fact that they're worshipped. They were asked, but people also worship other idols which aren't necessary for the world, and they answered, if only those were destroyed, it would then lend legitimacy to the worship of the sun, moon, and stars. The Gemara discusses this. There were other debates. For instance, why does God punish idol worshippers but not the idol itself? So they answered with the analogy of a king whose son named his dog the king and swore by it, so the king would get upset with his son but not at the dog. The philosophers argued the legitimacy of their idol, saying one time there was a massive fire and every building burnt down besides for the pagan temple. So they said it's comparable to a king who battles a rebellious army and ignores the corpses. They said then God should just destroy the idols, and they said they're worshipping the sun and moon and whatnot, so God's not going to destroy those because some people worship them. There's a similar discussion on this, how if somebody's healed after entering a pagan temple, it's essentially as God deemed somebody should be healed at that set time, and they just happen to enter a pagan temple at that point. The healing isn't going to be removed because they did so. Also, it says there was this one idol that appeared to people in their dreams and told them to sacrifice humans, and he'd bring rain, and it always worked. And it was explained that God sometimes gives lots of opportunities for people to worship idols so as to remove them from the world. New Mishnah. Further on the prohibitions against drinking wine from idolaters in case it was used as a libation for an idol. As a bit of a preface, one of the main methods of idol worship in those days was to pour wine as a libation to an idol. Such wine would be completely forbidden to drink or benefit from, and the libation could be caused by somebody even coming in contact with the wine for just a brief moment. So because of that, there were very strict prohibitions against drinking wine that came in contact with people who worshipped idols. Such wine was called Nesech. It said buying contents of a trodden wine press from an idol worshipper is permitted, even though it's being touched with their hands. It only can be Nesech wine once it goes into the cistern, and then only that is prohibited, not the remainder. Treading with an idol worshipper on a winepress is permitted, but not harvesting grapes with them. If the Jewish man processed wine while impure, he cannot tread or harvest grapes, but he can transport or carry barrels of wine. Similarly, a baker who is impure cannot knead or shape dough, but he can carry loaves with the bread merchants. The Gemara says some rule wine to be able to have the status of Nesech once it flows into the vat. This would not apply by our discussion, which was an original version of the teaching and was changed. Additionally, this opinion holds the wine is considered fully processed once it goes into the cistern. Others disagree and say it's once the pits and seeds and sediment float to the top. This applies while the wine is in the cistern, not in a cask. This applies by laws of Nesech wine. There is variation as to when wine is considered processed by laws of tithing and similar. The wine in the cistern is prohibited, the remaining wine is permitted. This does not apply if the contents of the strainer were put back into the treading basin. This applies if the forbidden wine in the cistern rose until it touches the remnants in the strainer. Additionally, it was said that treading alongside an idol worshipper on grapes is permitted if the man's hands are bound so he cannot touch the wine to use as a libation. There's no concern of him making a libation with his foot, as that's not considered to be a libation. There was a case like this, and the ruling was postponed until he found a source to rule it permitted to drink. There are related cases. It also says there's debate as to what age a person can create Nesech wine at, along with discussion on laws of impurity. It's debated. Others say it goes by if somebody is familiar with the service of idolatry that he can make Nesech wine. It discusses an incident. An idol worshipper entered a store and asked if there was any wine, and the store owner said no for some reason. So the idol worshipper saw a bucket of wine and angrily stuck his hand into it. So it was debated if this wine was permissible to drink in case it was done as a libation. It's discussed and said, we do have a concern it was for a libation unless it was done to the benefit of the Jewish wine owner. A similar case, a few sages had a waiter pour them wine and then realized he was an idol worshipper. Some said there was a concern it was poured as an idolatrous libation, so it couldn't be benefited from. Others said there was no concern at all and it was permitted to drink from. It's held it's not a concern of libation, as the man poured a jug, which is his force and is not considered like himself, and it clearly wasn't for a libation. It also debates the status of wine that was diluted with water. There's related discussion of various other cases. It said an idol worshipper cannot bring grapes to a wine press, at least as a first resort, in case it results in a prohibition. It cites cases. What if it clearly wasn't for a libation? For instance, an esrog fell into a cask of wine, and an idol worshipper stuck his hand in and grabbed the esrog. It was said he should hold his wine still and pour out the layer of wine his hand touched, so as to be safe, so that way there's no prohibitions. In the event that an idol worshipper poured a libation with somebody's wine, it's as if he destroyed it, legally speaking, so he can technically take restitution by having him pay him to purchase the wine. There was another incident. A cask of wine's spigot fell out, so an idol worshipper stuck his hand into the opening, plugging it shut, and was ruled that the wine in the spigot area was prohibited due to these concerns of libations, while the rest of the cask was allowed. Others say that the wine from the top until the spigot was prohibited, while everything below was allowed. It's discussed. If an idol worshipper is pouring the wine while a Jewish man holds the jug, the wine is prohibited as it comes out from the idol worshipper's force, so it could be an idolatrous libation. If it's vice versa, it's fine unless the idol worshipper repositions the jug as it's poured. If somebody sees an idol worshipper walking with a leather flask full of wine, if it's full, there's no concern of libations, as the wine can't really be stirred through shaking the flask. This would be a concern if the flask is half full. Others say it's not a concern, as shaking the flask isn't considered a libation. If it was a jug, if it's full, it's prohibited, as he could stick his hand in it. If it's half full, as long as he's walking, it's fine, as he won't be able to stick his hand in it. If there's a beam wine press operated by an idol worshipper, it's debated if the wine is permitted or not, where the crushing of the grapes is not through his direct force, it's through the force of his force. Some ruled this to be permitted, others say the debate is where it's through his direct force. There are related incidents. New Mishnah. If an idol worshipper was found next to a wine cistern, if he had a loan to pay to the owner, the wine is prohibited, otherwise it's fine. If the man fell into a wine cistern and climbed out, or if he measured it with a reed, or took a bug out with a reed, or tapped the top of a foaming cask, which were all recorded incidents, some say it was fine and should just be sold to an idol worshipper, others say that anybody could drink it. There was a case where the idol worshipper angrily took the cask and threw it into a cistern, and the cistern's wine was ruled to be permitted. The Gemara clarifies the loan is a loan specifically on the wine. If the idol worshipper falls into the cistern, the wine is only permitted if he died, as if he was alive he would have definitely celebrated by making it a libation to his idol. Its rules like the opinion in those cases that it can be sold to the idol worshippers. The remaining points are qualified. New Mishnah. If a Jewish man took an idol worshipper worshipper's wine while pure and put it in the idol worshipper's domain in a house that opened to a public domain, the wine is permitted if both idol worshippers and Jewish men live in the town. If it's inhabited entirely by idol worshippers, it's prohibited unless he has a guard over the wine, even if occasionally. It's also said the domains of idol worshippers are one domain, which will be explained. If the wine is stored, as in the above case, and the idol worshipper writes a receipt saying he received payment, the wine is permitted. If the situation is that the idol worshipper wouldn't allow him to remove the wine unless he gave him the money, there was a case like this and it was ruled that the wine was prohibited. The Gemara says, the city inhabited entirely by idolaters is one that's entrance is locked, so no Jewish peddlers or merchants are around. It qualifies points on the domain. This is further discussed. The point that all idol worshippers' domains are one is a leniency, saying it's rhetorical, meaning if the wine is stored in another idol worshipper's domain, it would be permitted. It's debated. There was a case where wine was stored and an idol worshipper was found standing nearby, and it was held that had the man been caught touching the wine, he would have been arrested, then the wine would be permitted, otherwise not. And that's the end of chapter 4. Chapter 5, the final chapter of Tractate Avodah Zarah, finishes discussion on the laws of Yayin Nesech, the prohibitions against benefiting from wine that was possibly used for an idolatrous libation. The first Mishnah says, if an idol worshipper hired a Jewish worker to help handle prohibited Nesech wine, he's not allowed to benefit from the wages. He would be permitted to do so if he had done any other job, even moving around the barrels of Nesech wine. Similarly, if the man hired a Jewish man's donkey to transport the forbidden wine, the payment cannot be benefited from. If he had hired the donkey to ride and also happened to use it to transport the forbidden Nesech wine, the payment would be permissible. The Gemara debates whether wages of working with Nesech wine are problematic, unlike by other laws of forbidden vegetation like Orla and Kilayim. It's explained that possibly this was a unique additional fine that was established, which is similar to the points on working with Shemitah sabbatical year produce. It does say, however, this was a unique stringency by Nesech wine due to the severity of the possible transgression of idolatry. This stringency would also apply to regular wine of idol worshippers, not just Nesech libation wine. It cites some related incidents, and there are further additional laws discussed. This goes further. It is also asked, if an idol worshipper pays a Jewish man to destroy barrels of forbidden Nesech wine, it's debated if he's allowed to benefit from this wage. It's a good thing, so he should. It argues this principle from other sources, including on uprooting kilayim, forbidden plant mixtures. Further, if an idol worshipper sold his own idol, based on an incident, it implies the proceeds would be permitted for others to benefit from. It argues on sources for this. Related, it proves that biblically, a convert does not inherit from his father, and the fact that he does so is a rabbinic institution. It's also asked if a ger toshav, a resident alien, essentially a non-Jewish man who agrees to give up idolatry before a beis din, if he can nullify his own idols. It's said that as he doesn't worship them any longer, he cannot nullify them, although others argue with this. Further points regarding such a convert, it said they're permitted to guard wine for short periods, and if a majority of the city are idol worshippers, even for long periods they can do this. His wine also has the same status as his oil, that it can be benefited from but not consumed. Others say his wine is treated like actual Nesech wine. Otherwise, he has similar laws to somebody who worships idols, so apparently he can nullify his own idols. So we say no. The point on similar laws was regarding courtyard domains on Shabbos. It cites an incident when a sage gave a present to a non-Jewish man on an idolatrous holiday, and it was fine then, as he knew the man didn't celebrate the holiday, even though he was not a ger toshav. It is also said a ger toshav must eventually circumcise himself, but only if he made a commitment to do so, otherwise he has no need to do this. It gives other instances of sages giving presents. Once Rava gave a gift to a non-Jewish man on an idolatrous holiday, and it was fine as he knew he didn't worship the idols. Rava went to find him and found him in a bathhouse covered in rose petals and surrounded by harlots, and the man asked if this kind of enjoyment exists in the world to come. Rava said it was far greater, as then there will be no fear of the monarchy. The man said, well, he doesn't have any concern of the monarchy, and at that exact moment, royal emissaries arrived, ordering the man to go to the king. He then cursed Rava, saying his eye should fall out, and then his own eye came out. It discusses the remaining cases. New Mishnah. If forbidden Nesech wine fell onto grapes, they should be rinsed off, and the grapes are allowed. If the grapes were cracked, they would be prohibited. If the wine fell into figs or dates, if there's enough wine to give flavor, they're prohibited. It cites an instance of this. Generally, if the flavor absorption is beneficial, they're prohibited. If it results in a loss, it's permitted, such as by vinegar that fell into split beans. The Gemara clarifies the wording of the particular instances. Also, there was a time a barrel of Nesech wine spilled on wheat, and it was ruled permitted to sell the wheat to an idol worshipper so long as they were ground and baked into bread and not sold before another Jewish man. The issue in the first place with the wheat is that they have clefts, so are similar in status to cracked grapes. It said if aged Nesech wine mixes with grapes, it prohibits the grapes if it imparts flavor. If it's new wine, some say it prohibits the grapes if it's a small concentration, others say it's only if it imparts flavor to the grapes. This is a dispute based on if the concept of similarity is based on taste or on name. They argue their opinions further on how they would rule in related situations. Related, there's a debate on if it's permissible to even smell wine through its stopper, if it's yayin nesech, based on a debate as to whether you hold that smell has substance. They debate this from other discussions. It also holds the law that the general rule applies if a forbidden substance imparts flavor to a benefit, it causes a prohibition, otherwise it's permitted. This is qualified. Others seemingly disagree, saying if the forbidden item imparts a detrimental substance, it's forbidden, and it argues sources. This is debated further, and it additionally discusses particular cases. It debates the status if a mouse fell into beer. It also discusses what if a mouse fell into vinegar. It's said to be prohibited, but that's if it disintegrated. And the decided law is that the flavor is nullified by it being a 60th of the mixture, called bittul b'shishim, which is a fundamental principle by the laws of kosher. New Mishnah. If an idol worshipper helped a Jewish man transport jugs of wine and the Jewish man left, if the wine was supervised, it remains permitted, with no concern of it being used as an idolatrous libation. If he said he would be going far away, some say it remains permitted for the amount of time for the idol worshipper to bore a hole in the cover, fill it with clay, and have it dry. Others say it would be for long enough to remove the cover, put on a new one, and have it dry. Similarly, if somebody leaves his wine in a wagon or a boat with a man who worships idols and walks a while away to enter a city and bathe, for example, the wine remains permitted. If he told the man he's going far away, it's a debate. Some say it remains permitted for the amount of time for the idol worshipper to bore a hole in the cover, fill it with clay, and have it dry. Others say it's long enough to remove the cover, put on a new one, and have it dry. Similarly, if somebody leaves an idol worshipper alone in his store, or even if the owner is going in and out, the wine is permitted. If he said he'd be going far away, some say it remains permitted for the amount of time for the idol worshipper to bore a hole in the cover, fill it with clay, and have it dry. Others say it's long enough to remove the cover, put on a new one, and have it dry. Also, if he was dining with an idol worshipper and he left wine on the table and in a cupboard and left, what's on the table is forbidden, what's in the cupboard is permitted. If he told the man to pour himself and drink while he's gone, the wine in the cupboard is forbidden. Any open barrels in the house would be forbidden, but sealed ones would be fine within the time to remove the cover, put on a new one, and have it dry. The Gemara says the wine in the first case, being in a state of supervision, would even be if the owner didn't tell the idol worshipper he was leaving, and he traveled less than a mil, which is a distance. It discusses this and also explains the necessity of all the cases. A boat and wagon are different, as they can be moved away, and a store can even be locked. Also, this whole dispute about the sealing of the lid is where it's made of plaster. If it's clay, it's agreed it's for sufficient time to remove and replace the cover fully. This is the opinion we hold like by all the cases, that it goes by the time to replace the cover, not to make a hole. However, in spite of all this, they still wouldn't deposit sealed wine with idol worshippers as there was the air hole. Also, if an idolatrous harlot is dining with Jewish men, there are other concerns, but no concern of idolatrous libations. Unless there are other idol-worshipping men there, it brings a number of particular incidents, and there are further particular cases discussed. New Mishnah. If a troop of soldiers entered somebody's home during peacetime, all open barrels within are prohibited, and sealed ones are permitted. If it was during wartime, both are permitted, as there's just no time to pour libations. The Gemara says, nevertheless, there would be a concern of them taking time to assault women, which has relevancy by other laws. New Mishnah. If a Jewish worker is given a barrel of Nesech wine as their wage, they're allowed to request money instead. Once it enters their legal domain, it's too late. The Gemara says it's allowed to have your tax paid by directing the tax collector to the Nesech wine payment. New Mishnah. If a Jewish man sells his wine to an idol worshipper, if the price was set before the man measured the wine, the payments can be benefited from, otherwise it cannot. The Gemara says the acquisition here would be granted by the man actually taking the item. Others disagree with this. This principle is debated further, and it proves that taking an item via acquisition is the valid method of acquisition with an idol worshipper. It brings further proofs for this. There's related debate by laws of acquisition. It's held if a man tells somebody that if he sells his field, he'll give it to the particular individual for 100 zuz, and then he sells it to somebody else for 120 zuz. The second sale is valid due to the increased price. Similarly, if a seller has his item's value appraised by 3 men, the buyer cannot have 3 new men appraise it. We assume the validity of the initial appraisal. The Mishnah. If a Jewish man took a funnel and poured wine into an idol worshipper's flask, and then stuck the funnel into a Jewish man's flask, if the bottom of the funnel has a protrusion to retain wine, there's concern there's leftover wine from the first flask, and the second flask would therefore be prohibited. Similarly, if a person pours wine from vessel to vessel, the wine in the first vessel is permitted, and the wine in the second utensil is prohibited. The Gemara says, similarly, a vertical stream, a stream running down a steep slope, and a liquid that there's enough of it to make something else moist. All of these could create a connection by the laws of Nesech wine. It debates this from several proofs. Related, it was said that Jewish wine sellers should pour wine for idol worshippers in either short bursts or throw it from afar, so that way there's no connection with the wine, making the supply no longer be kosher. It was also said to preferably not have such an individual help carry barrels of wine in case he carries it entirely himself for a moment, and therefore prohibits the wine out of concern of a libation. It brings related cases. New Mishnah. It's prohibited to benefit from Nesech wine, and it can make other drinks prohibited in a mixture of a small concentration. This applies to wine mixed with wine or idolatrous water mixed with water. If it's wine mixed with water or water mixed with wine, it creates a prohibition if the forbidden substance imparts a flavor. There's a general principle: if a prohibited substance mixes with more of itself, it's prohibited through a small amount. If it's to a different substance, it's prohibited if it imparts flavor. The Gemara says an opinion: if a person pours a barrel of Nesech wine into a cistern of kosher wine, it's fine, as each drop of forbidden wine gets nullified as it falls in. This is debated at length. If Nesech wine falls into a cistern of kosher wine and a flask of water also fell in, if the wine fell in last, it's all prohibited. If the kosher wine was added last, it's permitted. Others disagree and say it's permitted either way. They argue sources. Regarding the general principle that prohibited substances mixing with their own kind creates prohibitions through a small amount, while to a different substance through spreading flavor. Some say this is a general law that applies to all prohibited substances in Torah. Others say it only applies to Nesech wine and untithed produce. They bring sources. New Mishnah. The following things are prohibited for benefit in any amount: Nesech wine, an idol, heart-pierced skins, an ox that was condemned to be stoned, a calf that was to be decapitated, birds of a metzora offering, hair of a nazir, a firstborn male donkey, meat cooked with milk, the he-goat for Azazel on Yom Kippur, and unconsecrated animals slaughtered in the temple courtyard. These are prohibited along with anything they're mixed with. The Gemara says, this list is items forbidden for benefit and items which are counted as significant. This excludes things like chametz on Passover and similar. New Mishnah. If Nesech wine falls into a cistern of kosher wine, the whole thing is forbidden to benefit from. Others say it could just be sold to an idol worshiper minus the value of the Nesech wine that was added. The Gemara says it holds it's forbidden if the actual wine was mixed with kosher wine. If a barrel of Nesech wine was mixed with other barrels of kosher wine, that could be sold to an idol worshiper minus the value of the Nesech wine. And this can also be done if it was just regular non-kosher wine mixed with regular wine. New Mishnah. If an idol worshiper coated a stone wine press with pitch, which makes it non-kosher through forbidden wine, it can be fixed by drying it, which removes forbidden wine residue. If it was made of wood, some say he should dry it, others say he should remove the pitch coating. If it was made of earthenware, it's prohibited. The Gemara says it's only necessary to dry it if it was coated with pitch. If you just used it to press grapes, it's not necessary to dry it. There's variation on this, and it further lists proper purification methods of all parts of a wine press according to various opinions. This is discussed further. New Mishnah. If somebody purchased food utensils from a non-Jewish person, if the utensil is purified through immersion in a mikveh, it should then be purified through immersion in a mikveh. If it's purified through purging in boiling water, it should be purged in boiling water. If it's purged in fire, it should be purged in fire. A spit and grill should be purged in fire, and a knife should be scraped on a grindstone. The Gemara says that the utensils should be immersed in a proper mikveh of 40 of water, and it brings sources. These purification requirements apply to even brand new utensils. It discusses the purification status of particular types of utensils. It further qualifies the opinions on different purification requirements for various utensils, and also describes the proper methods of purification. For instance, if a pot needs to be purged in boiling water, it should be put inside of a larger pot of boiling water. On the purification of a knife, it said it should be stuck 10 times into the ground. Some say it must be done with untilled earth. Others add that this only works on an unblemished, unpitted knife. Also, this is said to work to allow the eating of cold food with the knife. It cites an incident where the king Shapur stuck a knife 10 times into the ground before cutting a slice of an esrog to give to a sage. He didn't do this for another man, as he was a less than scrupulous individual. And that's the end of chapter 5 and the entire Tractate Avodah Zarah. Alright, that was a lot of information, so here's a rough summary of a lot of the practical takeaways from this tractate. There's a prohibition against serving or assisting the service of idols. Worshipping an idol in any form is strictly prohibited. Additionally, assisting the service of idolatry is prohibited. There were many pagan holidays mentioned within ancient Rome, Babylonia, and Persia, wherein doing business transactions around the time of the holiday was disallowed in case it resulted in further service of the idol. There were many safety precautions taken in those times out of concern of the pagan neighbors. In those days, prior to modern religious morality, there was a serious concern that these ancient pagan tribes would commit various forms of immorality regarding things like murder, assault, and even bestiality, so there were many precautionary steps taken to prevent such things. There are particular concerns regarding various foods like baked goods, dairy products, and wine. There are stringencies regarding cooked foods, baked goods, and breads to try to purchase it from a Jewish baker if possible, referred to as Bishul Yisrael and Pas Yisrael. It was instituted to prevent possible concerns of intermarriage. Similarly, there are additional stringencies regarding dairy products and cheese. There are very complex laws of kosher with these foods that not everybody is aware of. So many purchase dairy products which are specifically washed by somebody to make sure that everything was prepared properly, referred to as Chalav Yisrael. A similar concept existed by wine. In those times, wine was often used as a libation for idolatry, called Yayin Nesech. So there are stringencies on purchasing wine to make sure everything is kosher. Additionally, if a utensil is used for non-kosher food to any degree, anything it's then used on becomes non-kosher. So all utensils, even brand new ones, must first be immersed in a pool of water, a mikveh, or otherwise purged with heat. And that's about everything. Thank you so much for watching.